Please pray with me. May these words that I speak be grounded in my soul, encouraged by the God presence in me. And may these words that you hear be captured by your soul, enlivened by the God presence in you. Amen. Brian McLaren, pastor, author, activist, and a leading figure in the emerging church movement, proclaims what I also believe and have tried to be about for many years in ministry, and that is that love and not beliefs must be the center of our faith. In his latest book, The Great Spiritual Migration, he writes, "The only thing that matters is faith expressing itself in love." Galatians 5:6. "And beloved, let us love one another because love is of God. Everyone who loves is born of God because love is of God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. No one has ever seen God. If we love one another, God lives in us, and love is perfected in us." 1 John 4:7, 8, and 12. In light of scriptures like these, he writes, you might think that the primacy of love would be a settled matter in Christian faith. But here we are, 2,000 years into this religion, and for many, beliefs still rule. And love too often waits out in the hallway, hoping to be invited in and taken more seriously. We couldn't handle the call to faith expressing itself in love, so we reverted to beliefs, expressing themselves in exclusion instead. McLaren continues, Could it be that now is the time at long last for Christians to migrate to the vision shared by its original founder and his original followers? If Christian faith can be redefined in this way, if our prime contribution to humanity can be shifted from teaching correct beliefs to practicing the way of love, as Jesus taught, then our whole understanding and experience of the church could be transformed into a school of love. Imagine a school of love. What better experience could there be for us and for our children to be part of a community that their primary directive is to teach and practice love? I can see our sign out there, Winfield United School of Love. And no, this is not some kind of weird, cultish, Pollyanna, rose-colored glasses, love you bro, love you sis kind of thing, but is rather a place where our entire focus is to teach and to practice the way of love. How to genuinely learn to love ourselves, to love each other, to love all others, and to love this amazing creation that we are part of. To practice the great love that transforms our way of being in the world and becomes infectious in ever-widening circles. Does anyone else get excited about this? Can any of you imagine this kind of community? In some ways, we have already begun this work. We are in what I would say are the beginning or the baby stages, both in recognizing the centrality of love and in practicing that love within ourselves and with each other. But it seems to me that to make love our center and our purpose means that we must also understand Jesus in a different way than what our tradition has taught us. I don't see how we can become a love-centered community without embracing Jesus' humanity. His humanity. his humanness. Obviously, Jesus as God could love everyone. That's easy. Could welcome everyone. That's easy. For that is what a God of love would do. But only seeing Jesus this way makes him impossible to imitate, because we are not God. We can only then worship him and adore him. It is only by recognizing his humanity that we can then do our very best to live as he did and to love as he did. In the words of Gandhi, which I opened with, which could just as easily have been the words of Jesus, and may have been, actually, where there is love, there is life. And where there is not love, there is only fear and death. It is up to us. I know that many among us here in this community are distressed by the direction we seem to be going, moving away from the traditionalism of worshiping Jesus towards the more challenging way of following and imitating him. I know that many among us feel that the pillars of our faith are being rejected. And to those of you who feel this way, I do sincerely apologize. It is not my intention to make anyone feel bad about their faith. And at the same time, I am compelled to speak the truth that has long been abandoned in most of the Christian church, that Jesus' primary message was to love, not to believe. It was to love. And in loving, we must be willing to understand many things that we have been taught to believe differently. For me, it is imperative that we see the stories of Jesus' life in the context in which they were written, not as historical fact, but as myth and metaphor. And this was not to diminish the nature of Jesus, but in fact to demonstrate the incredible power of Jesus, who lived his very human life filled to the brim with the divine spirit of love. A love so big, that it became infectious among many in his short lifetime and spread exponentially in those first few decades after his death. It was the fullness of his love that caused his life to be written about in mythical proportions a century later, particularly the stories of his birth. You see, my friends, we actually know virtually nothing about the historical Jesus, because he only became known after he began his mission of love as an adult, a mission that lasted as little as 3 years. The earliest records, the letters of Paul and the Gospel of Mark, written between 40 and 60 years after his death, suggest that Nazareth was his home, not Bethlehem. And that Mary was his mother, but that his father was unknown. That the father was either deceased or perhaps had abandoned the family. We don't know, but there was no record of a Joseph in any of the early writings. Jesus was very likely born like every other peasant in Nazareth, with a midwife present, but no attending shepherds and angels. In truth, all of the stories related to Jesus' birth were created by Matthew and then Luke as metaphor and myth 100 years after he lived. And it was an attempt to capture the profound life of love lived by Jesus, this simple peasant from Nazareth. And so the stories began by creating a father figure, a Joseph, that was modeled on the Joseph from Genesis who saved the people of Canaan. His birthplace was moved to Bethlehem to align with the prophecy that the new king would come from the line of David, where David's father Jesse had been born. The angel that visits Mary, the Magi, the star that defied science and stopped in the sky, the lowly stable, the shepherds, and the chorus of angels were all ways to express the power of God, so evidenced and experienced in one Jesus of Nazareth. And I'm not telling you this to say the stories are of no value. On the contrary, these stories, these myths are incredibly valuable because they point us to the power of love. And there's no other way to describe it than in myth. The Spirit of God found in Jesus could not be captured in anything less than myth and metaphor. One of the anthems that I wrote while I was on sabbatical, which you will hear the choir sing in a few moments, is my very humble attempt to set the story of Christmas in this perspective. That the magical and wondrous story of Jesus' birth would be created after the fact in response to the tremendous, in fact, the stupendous life of love that Jesus lived as one of us. As the anthem concludes, Christmas only happens when love is lived on earth. There's nothing else that will bring Christmas to be. The mythical stories of Mary and the angel that I shared this morning, Jesus' birth in Bethlehem, and later the mythical story of the Magi must continue to be taught and to be embraced as a celebration of the life of Jesus and the challenge he gave to us to make love the center of our lives as well. These mythical stories must call us to follow and imitate rather than simply worship and adore. Frankly, anyone can adore him. There's lots of people out in the unchurched world that adore him. But it takes real courage and great commitment to follow him. We can only do that by opening to the flow of great love within each of us and living with love rather than beliefs as our core purpose. For where there is love, there is life. I'm hoping that maybe in just some little way I have been able to help you to see that I am not abandoning the faith, nor am I throwing out the biblical stories we have been taught and that so many hold so dear. Rather, I am challenging myself and all of you to a deeper faith rooted in love, to look at our nativity scenes with new eyes and see there the power of love to make a difference in the world. When I stand before my own nativity scene at home each year, I see in that child in the manger, in that little ceramic baby in this ceramic manger, I see not one person with the responsibility to change the world, but rather I see the potential in every single child, including myself, to become the change in the world that Jesus lived and died for. That, for me, is Christmas. We are called to so much more than adoration. We are called to imitation every day, every moment of our life. I want to conclude by returning to Brian McLaren, who says, "What I believe can and should happen is that tens of thousands of congregations will become schools of love. What I care about is whether they are teaching people to live a life of love, from the heart, for God, for all people, no exceptions, and for all creation. If our churches make this migration, if they make the way of love their highest aim, they will experience what Paul prayed for in his letter to the Ephesians. Their members will be strengthened in their inner being with power through the Spirit, so that Christ may dwell in their hearts through faith, as they are being rooted and grounded in love. They will employ every text, prayer, song, poem, visual and dramatic art, ritual and rite of passage, and every other spiritual resource to help people comprehend what is the breadth and length and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, so that they will be filled with the fullness of God, the fullness of love. In this way, with that Spirit, may love be lived. Amen.